In the quiet suburbs of Sydney, Australia, a 15-year-old boy found himself alone at home one dark, chilly evening. It was a little after 9 p.m. when he left the bathroom, thinking it would be a calm night. But that illusion shattered when he heard the rusty creak of the front gate swinging open. The sound pierced the silence, its metal scraping cutting through the night. His dog, usually a calm companion, bolted to the front door, barking with a strange intensity, as if sensing something sinister. Something was wrong. As he looked down the hallway, his heart started pounding. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement. Someone was outside, moving quickly across the porch. He barely caught a glimpse, but it was enough. There, running past the window, was a figure, hunched and unsettling, with sickly pale skin that seemed almost luminescent in the dim porch light. His long, tangled black hair fell over his face, obscuring most of his features. The stranger was clad entirely in black, blending into the shadows, yet standing out with an unnerving clarity. The boy took a steadying breath and moved cautiously into the living room, hoping to get a better look and make sense of what he'd just seen. His dog was still at the door, growling now, ears flattened and eyes locked on something outside. The boy hadn't seen the strange figure leave, which meant only one thing: the stranger was still somewhere in the backyard, lurking in the darkness. Anxiety pooled in his stomach as he realized he was cut off, alone, with no neighbors nearby. Minutes passed in tense silence, each one stretching longer than the last. Suddenly, another man appeared on the porch, right up against the security bars, his face barely inches away. He looked ordinary, too ordinary, with an unsettling calmness in his demeanor. In a casual tone, he asked if the boy had seen his friend. The boy, trying to steady his voice, mentioned seeing a strange figure outside. The man explained he'd been following this random guy around all evening, thinking he was on drugs and potentially dangerous. Yet, something didn't add up. Why would he call the stranger his friend one moment, and then refer to him as a random stranger the next? The boy watched as the man turned and vanished into the darkness. Maybe he'd gone, he thought. But barely 2 minutes later, the man returned, this time with the sickly, pale intruder from before. The calm man leaned in again, trying to reassure the boy. He explained that his friend was just nervous and needed the boy to come outside, just for a moment, to show he meant no harm. The pale figure was pacing restlessly, every movement jittery, his eyes wide with a manic intensity as he stared at the boy. Then the stranger went still, staring dead into his eyes, his face twisted in an unnatural, vacant expression that sent a shiver down the boy's spine. It was too much. In that instant, the boy felt an overwhelming urge to escape, to shut these men out. He took a step forward and grabbed the French door, intending to pull it shut. But as he moved, the first man lunged, thrusting his hand through the bars, fingers clawing desperately toward him. Heart pounding, the boy jumped back, his foot slamming the door shut, bolting it in place. He stumbled backward, gripping his phone as he called his parents, his voice trembling. When the police arrived, they listened as the boy recounted every terrifying detail. The officers shared news of a break-in down the street less than an hour earlier, leaving him with an eerie realization. The men hadn't come just to steal. They wanted him, either to lure him outside or break in. As he processed the events, he felt a chill run through him. He had narrowly escaped, but the memory of those two men, their motives, and that stare would haunt him forever. It was a Thursday night, and the house felt empty, almost eerie in its stillness. His mom, a nurse, was working a late shift at the hospital, and his two brothers were away at college. Tonight, he had the whole house to himself. To break up the quiet, he invited a couple of friends over. They watched a baseball game, shared a few beers, and laughed about old memories. Eventually, his friends left through the back door, and he locked it behind them, believing he was alone again. The silence that settled after they left was different, heavier somehow. He went upstairs to put away the remaining beers in the fridge and started to get ready for bed. The house creaked, settling into its silence, while he washed up and changed. Soon after, he slipped under the covers, exhausted. But as he lay there, something felt off, as if the house wasn't as empty as he'd thought. He closed his eyes, but just as he was drifting off, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. Light, careful footsteps. He thought it might be his mom, home early from her shift. He even heard her cough softly as she passed his bedroom door and entered the bathroom, just like she always did. After a few moments, he heard noises from the kitchen, cabinets creaking, dishes clinking, the kind of noise someone makes when looking for something. Irritated by the disruption, he grabbed his phone and texted his mom, asking her to keep it down since he was trying to sleep. He put the phone back on his nightstand and turned over, expecting the noise to stop soon. Instead, he heard the footsteps again. Only this time they sounded faster, almost urgent, coming up the stairs. The footsteps stopped just outside his door, and then he heard it creak open. In the dim light from the hallway, he could make out a figure standing in the doorway. The outline looked familiar, like his mom, but something was wrong. She seemed slouched, her head tilted slightly, staring into the room without saying a word. Irritated, he muttered for her to stop making noise and let him sleep. But she didn't move or respond. Confused, he reached for his phone, just as it buzzed with a new message. He looked down, and the text from his mom sent a chill down his spine. "I'm still at work." Heart pounding, he forced himself to stay calm, choosing to act as if he suspected nothing. "Mom, I really need to get some sleep," he said casually, pretending to be annoyed. The figure didn't move. He slowly picked up his phone and texted his mom in a panic, asking her to call the police because someone was in the house. He looked back at the figure, who stood frozen in place. Suddenly it spoke, a crackly, unsettling voice he didn't recognize. The figure muttered, "Don't know where to go," and then, like a broken record, repeated the phrase over and over, each time louder than the last. Terrified, he turned on his bedside lamp, illuminating the figure, a frail old woman with frizzy white hair, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes empty and unseeing. Her hands reached toward him as she repeated, "Don't know where to go." He screamed for her to get back and ran out of his bed, lunging for the door. He slammed it shut, pressing his weight against it as the woman began banging and screaming, "I need to get out!" With all his strength, he held the door shut as she pushed from the other side, her strength relentless, the door shaking under her weight. His phone kept buzzing, but he couldn't reach it. Every second felt like an eternity. He held his breath, hoping she would give up, but her demands grew louder, more desperate. He could feel his heart pounding, unsure of how much longer he could hold out. Finally, he heard loud knocking on the front door. The police had arrived. He dashed downstairs and threw open the front door, shouting for help. The old woman followed him, her face twisted in desperation, but the police restrained her quickly, pinning her against the wall as she screamed incoherently. They placed her in cuffs and led her outside. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. The police told him she was likely suffering from severe mental illness and had somehow wandered inside. Later, they found out she'd entered through the back door, left unlocked after his friends left. In the aftermath, the quiet of his bedroom felt different, darker. Knowing she'd wandered freely around his house while he slept unsettled him deeply. Now, every creak in the night sent a spike of fear through him, and he could no longer shake the feeling that, even alone, he might not be safe. Before moving to California, I grew up on my dad's ranch in rural Colorado. The property was beautiful but desolate, surrounded only by open fields, dense woods, and a distant mountain range. It was the kind of place where you could feel the weight of isolation pressing down on you. My dad was protective of the land, especially with how often people would trespass. He kept 3 guns for emergencies, even chasing off 2 trespassers once. But no amount of preparation could have readied me for what happened one night when I was left alone. One hot June night, I was alone. My parents were on vacation, and my younger brother was out. I tried to enjoy the quiet, watching late-night TV in the living room. To cool off, I left the windows open, letting in the dry, warm air. Around 1 a.m., the motion sensor patio light flickered on. My heart skipped. The light only turned on with strong movement, so I assumed my brother had come home. But when I looked outside, there was nobody there. I tried calling him, no answer. Something felt wrong, but I brushed it off and returned to the couch. Minutes later, a loud knock echoed from the front door, making me jump. Our house had a peephole, so I went to check, but nobody was there. I immediately thought it was some local kids playing a prank. Still, a chill ran down my spine. I shut the blinds and sent my brother a quick text. "If this is you messing around, I'm locking you out." As I sat back down, trying to convince myself I was just paranoid, I heard another knock, this time at the window directly behind me. My heart raced. Something was definitely off. I froze when I heard the knock at the window, my heart pounding. Then, to my horror, I heard two voices, a low, guttural male voice and a high-pitched, raspy female voice, whispering in unison, "We see you." Panic clawed at me. I wanted to believe it was my brother and his girlfriend playing a joke, but something about those voices felt wrong. I stayed still, not daring to look. The knocking grew louder and moved to another window. I realized they were moving around the house, circling it. I felt trapped. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, to grab one of my dad's rifles. My hands shook as I loaded it, but holding it gave me a sense of control. Returning to the living room, I looked out the window where I last saw the shadows, but they were gone. Silence filled the air again, but I wasn't taking any chances. I decided to do a quick lap around the house, clutching the rifle tightly. I stepped outside, the cool night air prickling my skin. Every corner I turned, I braced myself for the worst. After checking the property, I returned inside, double-locked the doors, and went upstairs to bed, hoping that was the end of it. But around 2 a.m., the silence shattered. Someone was pounding on the front door, frantic and heavy. I heard a man's voice, a raw, guttural scream without words, just pure terror. My heart raced as I grabbed the rifle again. Rushing to the window, I flung it open and fired a shot into the dark. The scream stopped, replaced by retreating footsteps echoing across the porch, swallowed by the night. Silence returned after that. I spent the rest of the night on edge, clutching the rifle, listening to the house settle and the crickets outside. In the morning, I called my brother and told him everything. It hadn't been him or anyone he knew. When my dad returned, he praised me for how I'd handled it. But after that night, the ranch felt different. Even in the daylight, the land seemed darker, like it was hiding something. I was thankful for the guns more than ever, but I was even more grateful to leave that place behind. It was a quiet spring night, and I was home alone. The world outside was still and dark, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the road. I was on FaceTime with my friend, Jordan, passing the time, chatting casually. Pacing back and forth in my room, I glanced out the window mid-conversation and froze. A figure was standing across the street, completely still, facing my house. The man's face was obscured by shadows, but it was clear he was looking directly at my window. My breath caught, and I stammered as I tried to show Jordan, tilting my phone towards the window. She couldn't see him, of course. She told me I should call my parents, but I didn't want to panic them, yet. I hung up with Jordan and called my mom, who was sleeping and groggy. She told me it was probably nothing and suggested I turn off the lights and close the blinds. She said he'd lose interest and leave. I hesitated, then followed her advice, pulling the blinds down and switching off the lights, hoping that the darkness would make him disappear. But my curiosity wouldn't let me rest. After a few minutes, I lifted the blinds just slightly. My heart sank when I saw he had moved closer. Now he was on the sidewalk, right in front of my house, still staring up at my window. This time, I could see him more clearly, his face blank and expressionless, his eyes unblinking. I dialed 911 with trembling hands, explaining to the operator that a man was standing outside my window, staring directly at my house. She asked if he was holding any weapons, but I couldn't see anything from where I stood. She advised me to stay inside, assuring me they would send a patrol car to drive by the house. I hung up, trying to shake the unease, and crawled into bed, still clutching my phone. To calm myself, I FaceTimed Jordan again, whispering as we tried to reassure each other. I checked the window repeatedly until I finally saw the police car's headlights sweeping down the street, casting light across the yard. I watched as it slowed in front of my house, the officer's spotlight scanning over the yard and neighboring houses. Moments later, the car drove away, and I took a deep breath, thinking it was over. After hanging up with Jordan, I settled back into bed, my body still tense, but a bit calmer. Then, just as I was finally drifting off, I heard it, a faint cracking sound from outside. I sat up, my heart racing, but I couldn't see anything unusual through the blinds. I told myself it was nothing, but a few minutes later there was another sound, louder this time, like wood splintering. Slowly, I looked toward the window and saw a dark shape clinging to the wall just beneath it. My heart dropped. He was climbing up the side of the house. I was frozen in place, unable to breathe as he reached the window. His face was just inches away from the glass, expressionless, his eyes locked onto me. I broke from my trance, bolted to the other side of the room, and screamed as loud as I could, hoping to wake the neighbors. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again, begging for them to come immediately. Suddenly, I heard my elderly neighbor's voice from outside, yelling. The man at the window glanced away, his expression changing, and before I knew it, he dropped down, disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived again, and this time I spoke to them directly. I described every unsettling detail, the way he stared, the way he climbed up to my window, and the sheer terror of feeling trapped in my own room. My neighbor had seen him too, thankfully, and backed up my story. The officers assured me they'd patrol the area all night to keep an eye out. I thanked them, but as I watched their car drive away, the house felt somehow darker, like the shadows were hiding things that hadn't been there before. When I finally returned to bed, I lay wide awake, eyes darting from the ceiling to the window, unable to shake the feeling that he might return. I kept listening for every creak, every slight rustle outside. My mind replayed his face, pressed against the glass, his eyes searching for a way inside. Minutes turned into hours, and I knew I'd be haunted by the memory of that face in my window for many nights to come.